We'll provide some more biographical material on Hawthorne in the next lecture because we're going to tackle House of the Seven Gables. I decided to go ahead and move the discussion of the preface off until that point as well, deal with it all as one unit. But this is one of the most famous American short stories, probably one of the two or three best, or at least the most written about and talked about. Maybe not quite as famous as Young Goodman Brown, which is one of his other great short stories. But frankly, this short story would have been forgotten forever. One gathers, were it not for the work of a woman named Queenie Leavis, and yes, that is her first name, Queenie. She was a literary critic. She was married to F.R. Leavis, also a literary critic. In her honor, I put the little picture of her there. She published a two-part critical piece in the Swanee Review in 1950 that essentially made the case that, hey, you know what? This is one of the greatest short stories ever written by an American, and not a soul has written on it. And up to that point, nobody had even noticed it. It was a tremendously influential piece. It really resurrected this one, brought us real revival to Hawthorne studies in general. I should go back a little bit more in time and say that the modern canon of great writers, at least the great, male writers anyway. We know that the canon has been changed and morphed over time as we introduce new people to it. But the canon of writers, the traditional canon anyway, of Hawthorne and Poe and Whitman and these kinds of folks, really originated with F.O. Matheson, whose book The American Renaissance in 1946, if I recall correctly, 45 or 46, came out and was a really groundbreaking work that sort of established these are the great American writers. That's in part due to the fact that after World War II and into the 1950s, American literature began to be studied in U.S. colleges and universities and even in high schools, partly as a kind of a patriotic Cold War thing. Had you said I wanted to teach an American literature class in the 1920s at a major college or university, you would have been laughed at, or sort of, why would you want to do that, or gosh, that's a quirky thing to do. Everybody studied English literature, British writers, and it was after World War II that we began to study people like Hawthorne in greater seriousness. So when Leavis writes her two-part critical work, it doesn't just rediscover Hawthorne's short pieces, it bolsters Hawthorne's reputation, and it also kind of gives us a little roadmap as to how to investigate American literature. So I highly recommend it if you can find it out there. It's bound to be anthologized or even perhaps even online. This particular piece has been celebrated as a sort of dark Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman is like a growing up or coming of age tale. They can obviously be quite long, like Tom Jones or something of that nature. Great Expectations is a Bildungsroman where we start with a character who's young and naive, and we see that character progress. This is obviously takes place in the course of just a few hours in this young man's life, but it deals with a very American theme of going from innocence to experience. We don't really have time in this class, and I'd love to do it. I do it in my American fiction course to cover, for example, some of the material from James Fenimore Cooper, the Leather Stocking Tales, Last of the Mohicans, and those characters out of there, like Natty Bumppo. The innocence to experience theme is very prominent in American literature because we kind of see ourselves as a civilization that's gone from innocence to experience in some respects. Every time a major national catastrophe happens, we kind of frame it in terms of innocence to experience. Pearl Harbor, we were naive and carefree, and then we were attacked. 9/11, we were naive, and now we're wiser and older and somewhat sadder about the world. That's kind of a sort of recursive thing that goes on in American culture. You can see that. Well, let's hone in on this particular short story a little bit. A few things to kind of keep in mind as we go forward. We'll analyze in greater depth with the next slide, but a few things I want to leave you with. First of all, notice this. Why aren't we told in the early part of the short story what Robin's last name is? The narrator actually says a young man, one of whose names was Robin. It's quite interesting. Can you figure out what the last name is? It's not a big guess. Not a hard guess, hard thing to guess. It is Molineux, but you have to work to figure that out. We are told that the major is the brother, if I got this right, the brother of his grandfather. So that would make him like a great uncle. He continuously goes throughout the short story saying, "Hey, can you show me the way to my kinsman Major Molineux's house?" and so on and so forth. But he never states what his last name is. And I think that's quite interesting because, again, maybe this has to do with the question of identity as a theme. We'll talk about that in a moment. How does Good question here. How does your impression of Robin change from early in the tale to the midpoint of the tale and then at the end of the tale? Because there is a progression here. Again, it's a kind of a Bildungsroman, innocence to experience. So how does your impression of the main character change? Hawthorne made the decision in this piece and obviously in The Scarlet Letter and in Young Goodman Brown and so many of the other pieces to use history as his backdrop. A lot of the American writers said, we don't have a lot of material to work with because we don't have an extensive history. We've got nature, we've got the frontier, yes, but we don't really have a long, distinguished history of great battles and chivalry and knights and shining armor and castles and ancient things like, Julius Caesar, and we don't even have a lot of modern day heroes like Napoleon. So what are we going to write about? And Hawthorne said, no, there is history here. Go back and mine it for what you can get it. But, history is the backdrop. It's the characters that really mean a lot. And I think Hawthorne was onto something there because certainly we find his historical material compelling, but we really find it mostly compelling because of the characters that are placed within those particular times and locations, and that's where the real genius is. He was greatly influenced by Pilgrim's Progress and other highly allegorical didactic works of fiction. I don't think I would call his works didactic, but he's always, and very upfront and very open about this, always looking to get to a kind of moral nugget, a moral point that's the driving thing. And his interest in using allegory and symbolism, very important. For example, in the introduction to The Scarlet Letter, he just comes right out and says, I find light to be a really interesting symbol. I love looking at light and using light in my works. And if you'll notice in this short story, there's moonlight, there's torchlight, there's lamplight, right? So there are a lot of different types of light. And Hawthorne even says, look, I'm really upfront. I use different types of light to signify different types of enlightenment or knowledge. So, for example, moonlight is used in the story in that interlude in the with the church where it shines on the Bible. Moonlight is a kind of intuitive knowledge, spiritual knowledge, mystical knowledge, whereas the torchlight is the light of civilization, of people, of the town. It illuminates, both illuminate, they just illuminate differently. And you think about it, man-made light and moonlight both illuminate with different qualities, don't they? I mean, you can look at the same thing, Hawthorne says in the introduction to The Scarlet Letter. You can look at the